Handsome here. On this week's vlog, we got Long Island's best of the best young bucks and one slightly older buck. We're talking about the current market conditions in mortgages, REOs, evictions, and real estate sales, about where we were pre-COVID, what's going on in COVID, where we are right now, and what their predictions are for years to come. So one of the big things in the real estate investment space, we're talking about REOs, right? Bank-owned properties. And everybody thinks, when you get into the real estate world, that banks are just giving houses away. That's obviously not the case. But there's been huge changes in the REO market from pre-COVID, when prices were nutty, to now, where the banks are scrambling and have no idea what they're gonna do and what's going on in the immediate future. But to tell you the best way, the intricate details of what's going on in that world, here's rockstar REO broker Rich Drury from Douglas Elliman.
So we're definitely seeing a major shift within the market with an increased demand with a lack of supply. What's happening right now within the REO space is that there's low inventory. So we have like 3 months of inventory that haven't been leased out, that the evictions have been on hold. Once this switches and now we can start to evict people, you'll see 3 months of inventory that was left behind. Plus, you have landlords that were unable to evict the occupants living in the properties. You have owners that may have tenants living in the house that they can't get out because they're not paying rent. People are telling them they don't have to pay rent. That's fine, that's great right now because they're collecting a check, they may be able to afford it, right? What happens when that check runs out? So I think it's not good due to the fact that people will be unable to make the mortgage payment. Some will go and try to do a modification to keep their house. Some will try to do a short sale in order to try to get a resolution with the lender. And then ultimately, people will not care, stay in their house, and ultimately lead to eviction and foreclosure, which will increase the inventory within the market.
I don't know if you guys have heard, mortgage rates are at historic lows. I know guys that are veterans of the business, that have been in the business 20, 30, 40 years, said they have never seen anything this crazy in their careers. Why does it happen? Where did we come from? What was the market like pre-COVID, through COVID? Things got crazy, and now as we work our way out of COVID into the recovery out of the recession, how has the mortgage industry changed? What's the opportunity? How do you, as a savvy homeowner, a savvy investor, take advantage of these super low rates and this opportunity? Here's rockstar Eric Braun from Contour Mortgage to explain.
What's going on in the mortgage world? More like what's not going on in the mortgage world. You'll see a bunch of different headlines. You'll see historic low interest rates, volatile interest rates. You have guidelines changing, mortgage forbearance and suspension of mortgage payments. What does all of this mean? Let me break it down to you. So before COVID, you had interest rates in, the low 4s, high 3s, still low interest rates by historical means, but affordability started to become an issue for a lot of borrowers and buyers. What happens? COVID hits, and the whole world, including banks, do not know how to react. What do? They completely remove non-QM from the shelves. The reason they did that, and when I say non-QM loans, I mean stated income deals, funky financing like that. The reason they did that is because overnight they were worried about capacity. You had all of these people going into mortgage forbearance and suspension of their mortgage payments. That means these banks still need to make payments to the note holders, but are no longer receiving payments from the borrowers. This becomes an issue. Money may run out. Then on top of that, you had the government pour trillions and trillions of dollars into bonds, or the bond market. The reason they did this is to keep the economy afloat, but what did that do to interest rates? It tanked interest rates to historic lows. So you have people not making their mortgage payments, but also interest rates being so low that there's a rush of refinance applications. And what does that do? Makes banks worried about capacity. So what do to counteract that? They take away non-QM, they start increasing credit score requirements, changing guidelines when it comes to debt to income ratios. Another thing that happened, if you are a self-employed borrower, since the very nature of COVID, a lot of these businesses were shut down. Banks know that and they're worried about it. So if you're self-employed and trying to get a mortgage right now, it could be a little bit more difficult because banks want to make sure your business is fully operational once again. So that's a quick snapshot of what's going on. The things that you need to know right now: interest rates are at an all-time low. I'm talking about in the 2s on 30 years, fixed, and we are busier than ever. When banks are busier than ever, turnaround times get a little bit longer, appraisers are backed up, they're taking a little bit longer. Just realize that deal that you may have closed 3 weeks, 2 weeks before COVID, into 2 or 3 weeks before COVID, may take 30 or 45 days. That's what's going on in the mortgage world.
So from my standpoint, one of the biggest issues right now affecting investors or real estate in general is evictions, or the lack thereof evictions. Things keep getting pushed back. There hasn't been evictions in months. We don't know if there'll be even evictions this year at all. I would estimate probably no evictions this year. It is a crazy time. People aren't paying rent, they're not getting out of foreclosed houses, but his eviction specialist, sniper, my man, Eric Get the Fuck Out Habib, to explain.
As restaurants, gyms, and bowling alleys are opening back up in New York, so are the landlord-tenant courts. Here's what you need to know about landlord-tenant during COVID-19. All evictions are currently on hold, as no warrants of eviction can be carried out by the sheriff until at least October 1st. Cases filed before March 17th, when the pandemic began, are starting to move forward with hearings now. Also, the courts are accepting petitions for new cases now. As of today in Nassau, the first available date for a hearing on a new case that hasn't yet been filed will be early December, and in Suffolk they aren't sure what will be the earliest date available as of yet. If you have a tenant that you want to evict, then what you can be doing now is serving them with a notice of termination. If your tenant is month to month and has lived in the property for less than 1 year, the notice requirement is 30 days. More than 1 year is 60 days, and if they have lived in the property for more than 2 years, the notice requirement is 90 days. Remember that the notice must be served prior to the first of the month. For example, if you need to serve your tenant with a 30-day notice to vacate the house by September 30th, you must serve the 30-day notice prior to September 1st. If you'd like, you can call or text me at 917-783-0632, and I'll help you with this. If the occupant is a squatter, then you would serve them with a 10-day notice. If you purchased a property at foreclosure auction, then you'd either give the occupant a 10-day notice or a 90-day notice, depending on whether the occupant is a tenant or the prior foreclosed owner. All of these notices would have to be served by a process server. You cannot serve these notices on the tenant yourself. If you have a residential tenant that hasn't been paying the rent, keep in mind the Safe Harbor Act prohibits evictions for non-payment of rent during COVID-19 if the tenant can prove financial hardship due to COVID-19. While you might not be able to evict your tenant, though, on the basis of non-payment of rent, the rent isn't waived. You can still seek a money judgment. Keep in mind, in order to sue for non-payment of rent, the landlord must notify the tenant of late rent payments not received within 5 days of the due date, which must be in writing and sent by certified mail. And the landlord must give 14 days written notice demanding the rent prior to commencing a non-payment case, which must be done by a process server. Also keep in mind the COVID-19 laws permit a tenant to apply their security deposit towards the rent. In addition to using the court system, or in combination with using the court system, you can also talk with your tenant about cash for keys. While they may not deserve the money, especially if they're behind on the rent, this method is the fastest and easiest way to get from point A to point B. It might also be cheaper than having to wait months for an eviction to be completed, and the tenant might damage the property on the way out. By offering cash for keys, you give the tenant the money after they vacated and took all their furniture and personal items, and you won't have to hire a crew to remove things the tenant left behind. The best way to do cash for keys is in combination with a landlord-tenant court proceeding.
It is a great time to be a rock star realtor. If you didn't think the real estate market as far as sales could get any crazier, than 2005, 2006, 2007. I wasn't around in the business. We've obviously all heard the stories, but the market that we're in right now is absolute pandemonium. I put 3 houses on the market last week. They all sold opening weekend, 10 G's over ask, 25,000 over ask, and $40,000 over ask. Can these prices keep going up? Why are they going up? Where are the buyers coming from? Where's all the inventory? Here's Dan O'Neill from Coldwell Banker, who does it better than anybody, to explain.
What's up, everybody? Dan O'Neill here from the O'Neill team at Coldwell Banker Residential. Today we're here to talk to you a little bit about the pre-COVID market, the COVID market, and now what we're kind of dealing with, I guess, post-COVID. This market is probably the craziest that we've seen in over a decade. We are absolutely drowning as an industry. So what's really happening and what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis right now is a lot of people are coming out from the city, mixed with the fact that we lost a lot of transactions during the 3 or 4 month pause that we had. So if I'm correct, I believe we were shut down as an industry from, I believe, March 15th to like July 15th. So what that really means is, let's say year over year, let's say last year, as just an easy number, there were 10,000 transactions from March 16th to July 16th. This year, with COVID-19 going on, we weren't allowed to show houses, we weren't able to work, nothing. So those 10,000 transactions that normally occurred did not happen. So when we got back to work July 16th, we had an absolute influx of people trying to make up for those 10,000 transactions between people moving, people coming out of the city, people leaving the state, so on and so forth. So we are getting our butts kicked because of that, number one. And number two, think about why you live in New York City. You live in New York City because of your commute, right? So a lot of people have to live out there because they work in the city. You live out there because of the bars, the restaurants, you have Central Park, you have the atmosphere, everything. So you live in the city because of those two reasons. And number three, you live there because maybe it's cost effective for you, maybe the school districts and so on and so forth. So 10,000 transactions that we have to make up in, I don't know, a couple weeks span. The school district and the school year is coming up and everybody is leaving the city. The city is an absolute ghost town. I'm sorry if you disagree with me, but the city is toast right now. So what's happening is a lot of people that have commercial leases, these big companies, let's say they have a $250,000 a month lease at a commercial space with a bar, they maybe have like a trampoline, they have offices sick. They do not want to spend that money anymore to have their employees commute into the city every single day, so they're able to now have their employees work from home. So with people now realizing, oh, well, I can work from home for the next year or so, work remote, why am I going to spend the money on an apartment? Why am I going to spend the money on something where I don't have a backyard? Why am I going to live in this city when I do not need to? So we're seeing a crazy influx of people due to their now non-commute, I suppose, fleeing the city and getting out of it. Reason number two, like I said, bars, nightclubs, restaurants, Central Park, walking around town, it's the whole atmosphere of the city right now, again, is completely toast. I went into the city a few weeks ago and I had the Spider-Man guy who does all the tricks and everything was literally hitting on me because there was nobody else for miles. If you look at Times Square, there's not even a single car. So people are fleeing the city because the atmosphere is gone. Your atmosphere is completely toast as of right now. So that's reason number two. And reason number three, it's all about affordability. So if there is another wave of this, knock on wood, hopefully there's not, but if there is, where would you prefer to be quarantined in? Would you prefer to be quarantined in a 800 square foot midtown apartment with no backyard, you can't even park your car on the sidewalk, no driveway? Or would you prefer to spend $2,400 a month on a mortgage and have a pool, have a street, have a driveway, have a town to go into, so on and so forth? So this market is absolutely insane. It's probably the craziest we've seen in a decade. On top of the fact that interest rates are at wherever they are in the high twos, on top of the fact that there is no inventory and no one is selling, on top of the fact that there is way too much demand and there is no supply. This is the craziest market we've seen in a decade. I'm sure of it. We're absolutely drowning, but it has never been any more fun. Dan O'Neill, the O'Neill team, God bless.
Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that. 4 young studs and 1 slightly older stud educating. If you guys like what you see, click the subscribe button. We got tons of free education, lots of laughs. Every day's an adventure. See you on the next one.